welcome to another Route Consultant Weekly webinar. If you've never been here before, if we've never met before, my name is Josh Gregory. I'm the VP of Education here at Route Consultant. All that means is I work with buyers, sellers across the board in a variety of verticals and different silos to make sure that everyone learns as much as they can about the space to be as successful as they can when they start operating and as they continue operating. So, and if you've never been to one of our webinars before, just a quick overview of what you can expect here is that today is basically a day where we want to make sure that we spend time teaching you about various things happening in the industry, giving updates, letting you know about some of the upcoming events and things that are happening in the industry. And also make sure that this is always a time where we can come together. You can ask questions about anything that comes to mind, and we're going to be here to answer those questions for you at the end. So before I go too much farther, just a quick disclaimer that I have to read as I do every week. So Route Consultant is not endorsed by and is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. So again, all that to say, this is a space where we do want you to learn, have your questions answered, and come back every week and continue to have a little bit of fun and provide helpful information. So the way that this format's going to go, we're going to go over some content, like I mentioned. I'm going to go over all of the new listings and events coming up. And then at the end is going to be open Q&A. And so as I'm talking today, as Jesse comes on and he's talking in a little bit later, make sure that you can go ahead and type your questions in and we'll get to them. But if you want to send your questions to us to answer, you have to put it in the Q&A button at the bottom. If you go down and click on the chat and that's where you type in your questions, we'll miss them. So make sure you put it in the Q&A if you want us to answer those questions at the end. So for today, so in the FedEx space, anytime that you're hiring new drivers and bringing them in as a driver, there is a really important set of qualifications that each driver needs to be trained on. And it is a required step before a driver can ever get on the road. So as we head towards peak season, one of the busiest times of the year, one of the times of the year where you're doing the most hiring, we wanted to make sure to go over that program again to make sure everybody knows what it is, why it matters. Also, if you've been paying attention or if you're a current contractor, you'll see that there have been some really important updates to that program that were just recently announced, and we want to make sure to talk about those as well. So today, I'm going to go ahead and bring Jesse Smith on, who's our Director of Operations here, to go over all of that for you. So Jesse, I'll kick it over to you.
Hey, Josh. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me on today. So we did a Qual Cert webinar back in April. So if you just can't get enough Qual Cert today, you can go back and watch our previous webinar where we talked about this program about 6 months ago. But I'll kind of recap what the program is. And as Josh said, we'll talk about what the new announcements are around Qual Cert in the space today, actually just announced this past week. So Qual Cert is short, as is everything in the FedEx space. It is short for Qualification Certification, and it is the program by which all drivers must participate in order to be qualified as drivers and to get behind the wheel with packages on board on a FedEx truck. Now, beforehand, before this program was rolled out last year, it's been in operation about 16 months now, almost a year and a half. And before, what FedEx did was they used the driving experience as a proxy for you being safe behind the wheel of a FedEx truck. And you might think, well, that's a good idea. If you've got previous commercial driving history, that's great. The thing was, though, that if you had just pizza delivery in your little Honda Civic, then FedEx was saying, okay, you're good to go. You can come get behind the wheel of this P1000 step van that weighs 3 times as much. So needless to say, there was a little bit of a gap. Now, some people had good experience. Some people who had no experience and would have made great drivers were barred from the space because they just didn't have the prerequisite driving history. So Qual Cert has changed all that. It's opened up the driving pool for anybody who wants to come be a FedEx driver, regardless of driving experience. As long as they pass the Qual Cert course, they can be a driver. So that's a really good thing. The other really good thing about it is that it lets you have vehicle-specific training for a driver. So if you want to have a driver in a P1000 step van or in a little Ford Transit, then you will want to make sure you give them the specific training curriculum and the road test that is specific to those kind of vehicles. Now, there's a general Qual Cert curriculum, and it's going to be different based on one of the 8 vendors that you use. FedEx has authorized 8 different vendors for you to use to get your drivers trained. And so each of those curricula is a little bit different, but you can customize the training to each individual truck size or truck type. So that's kind of the overview of what it is and why it's there. And I think it's a great thing. I don't always agree with everything that FedEx rolls out, but this is one that I very, very strongly endorse. I think it's a great idea to have good, solid training for each driver that comes into the space, regardless of their experience level. So with that, I want to kind of break down real quick what it is in terms of the logistics of it. So there's really 2 veins of the Qual Cert program, for lack of a better word. There's what's called the train the trainer part, and there's the actual 3-day driver course part. So the first part is the way this course is administered to your drivers is by way of what's called a certified trainer. This can be somebody on your team, or you can borrow somebody else's certified trainer. It can be anybody who's an ISP. And by the way, let me back up even further than that. This is not a line haul thing. This is only in the P&D last mile side. So if you're line haul, there's a whole different set of requirements that you have to have. You got to have your CDL. You got to have 1 year of experience. That part did not go away on the line haul side. But on the P&D side, all that has gone away. As long as you have a valid Class D license, in general, you're going to be just fine to take a Qual Cert course. So the certified trainer goes to an in-person 5-day course from one of those 8 safety vendors, like I mentioned. So the person can be your BC, it can be a lead driver, it can be anybody who has been accident-free and assigned to duty. In other words, they have to have been a FedEx driver already and accident-free for at least 1 year prior to when you send them to take the course. Once they've completed the 5-day course, they can come back and then administer the curriculum from that safety trainer, that safety provider, to your drivers. So again, you can use your own, you can use somebody else's, it doesn't really matter. But the point is that the training is basically mediated through these certified trainers. Now, again, I talked about this was rolled out almost 1.5 years ago, and it's been in operation, in force across the country ever since. It was rolled out in waves, as things in the FedEx space often are. So I want to real quickly hit a couple benefits and a couple of challenges that the Qual Cert program has created for drivers and for ISPs, and then talk about the new announcement that was just announced this past week. So one of the benefits of the course is, as I mentioned, it is vehicle specific. And so one of the things in the course that we tell the drivers is, hey, look, you're going to have a classroom part of the training. And then when you get done with the classroom part, you're going to go out on the road, and a certified trainer is going to administer, hey, let's go out on the interstate. Let me see how you do out there. Let's see how you do on these narrow country streets. Let's see how you do at busy intersections in this downtown area, right? What needs to happen is that the vehicle that you drive as a new driver applicant, it needs to be the same size or larger than the vehicle you're going to be assigned to once you start your route. So contractors, I want you to pay attention to that. If you're new to the space or you're thinking about getting in, if you have multiple kinds of vehicles in your fleet, if you've got transits, if you've got straight trucks, if you've got anything in between like step vans, you'll ideally want to train all of your new drivers in the largest size vehicle that you have. Because what happens when you do that is that they may drive anything up to that weight limit of that largest vehicle. So it's in your best interest, if you're considering moving your drivers around between routes and trucks, go ahead and certify them in that biggest size truck that you have. And then another thing that you can be confident in that it's a good program for you is that when you're going to get an insurance policy, let's say your workers' comp policy, a lot of carriers are going to want to look and see what safety programs do you have in place. Now, whether you have, in the past, you still had to have ongoing safety training. In other words, FedEx requires you to have some sort of program by which, on a weekly basis, your drivers were being exposed to videos or written material or otherwise that was relevant to the motor carrier space. But now, again, Qual Cert is kind of jumpstarts that process on the front end of it. They got a big old heap and helping of it in the classroom part of DOT laws and safe driving techniques, but they get that on an ongoing basis. And what your insurance carrier is going to want to see is, you got this ongoing safety training, but not only that, when our drivers come in from day one, They are getting in-depth training specific to the kind of job and truck that they're going to be doing and the kind of truck that they're in and day out. Those kind of things can matter a lot to a carrier. And if that's something that you've not brought up to an insurance carrier or the broker that you're working with, that's something I would absolutely mention to say, here's something on paper we can show that our drivers are being brought up the right way from day one. Now, a couple of the challenges of Qual Cert, and this is going to have to do with the announcement that was just made. So one of the big frustrations is that there is a bottleneck in the process as it relates to certified trainers. So if you remember, I mentioned every new driver has to be trained by a certified trainer, whether that's someone from your own company or somebody else's, it doesn't matter. So really, there's only as many drivers as there is availability for the CTs out there. And in some terminals, and some, especially your smaller terminals where there's a lot of small contractors that might only have, 5 to 7 drivers, and one of those drivers might be a BC, right? Especially if you got somebody who is doing management and driving at the same time, you might not be able to afford to send them away for a whole week to do this training in person, to be a CT for your team. So what that means is you might have to rely on somebody else to do that training for you to bring on new drivers onto your team. Now, if that's the case, then you can imagine if there's only one CT or a couple CTs being shared by 5 or more contractors, that person is going to be pretty busy, especially during peak season, right? The busy times of year, there's going to be a bottleneck around that CT's time. Now, the other thing is that's a little bit difficult to work around is that FedEx may not allow you to use their facilities for either the classroom part or for the road test part. So with the road test, just real quick, there's an over-the-road part, like I mentioned. And then there's a part out in the yard, out in the parking lot, where your driver's going to have to weave in and out of cones, different courses, little obstacle courses that they have to practice and go through and pass in the vehicle that they're in. So FedEx may or may not allow you to use their facilities in their yard space to do that. Some will, some won't. It's really kind of hit and miss, but don't plan on that being the case because the majority of the buildings and facilities will not allow you to do that. So what that means is you got to find your own conference space and your own obstacle course space, an empty parking lot somewhere. You got to find your own space to do that. Now, the final challenge, and again, this is where the announcement comes in, your CT has to recertify every 2 years. And not only that, they got to stay accident-free during their tenure as a CT. So if they're doing training some, they're managing some, and they're also filling in as a driver, if they have an accident, they automatically become invalidated in terms of their being able to sign off on road tests and provide the classroom training. So you got to think about that. And if they have to go back and recertify every 2 years, that's an additional cost that you have to account for. And the initial onboarding for a CT is about $2,700. And it's looking like most vendors are charging about $1,000 less than that for the recert. Now, the good news is the recert is only a 2-day in-person course, but again, it is an in-person course. So if you're having a hard time pulling your BC away to go do trainings and get away from the operation, this is going to be something you're going to have to plan for several weeks or months out in advance to make sure you have the redundancies in place to send your BC out to get the recertification. So again, that's the big announcement that happened around it, is the recert. It was kind of nebulous when it first started. We did hear that it was going to be every 24 months, but we didn't have any details, and now we do. So one thing I'll mention real quick, Josh, is that when you do send your CT to get certified, you have to have them recertified under the same safety vendor under which they were initially certified. Now, if you want to go have them certified initially with a different vendor, that's fine, but you can't have them recert with another vendor. They're going to have to go through that initial 5-day course if they go certify with another vendor out there. So that's Qual Cert in a nutshell. That's the new announcement. And again, I'm sure we'll get some feedbacks and questions on this because this is a lot to unpack.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Yeah, and I mean, like you went over, there's lots of good, there's lots of bad. It's more about making sure you understand the program and understand how to adapt and are ready to adapt with the changes that FedEx makes to the program. And so this is just another new change, or at least, we knew it was coming, but it's another new wrinkle to be prepared for. And the quicker you can be prepared and adapt with the way that FedEx changes these programs, the better off you're going to be. If you wait until the last second, that's, a lot of contractors will see changes and will decide, I just don't want to deal with the new change that is rolled out. And so I'll just try to ignore it. And that's how you get into trouble. So any advice I can give you as you enter this space and any logistics space is that the only constant is change. So always be ready for these things as they come and be prepared to roll that into your ongoing strategy. So before we get to Q&A, which we will get to, I'm going to go over the new inventory and the new upcoming events. So as I'm going through this, if you have any questions for the Q&A, you can go ahead and type those in and we'll get to them in just a second. So there are a few new listings this week. The first one is a bread route out of Louisiana. It's a price $280,000. Comes with a truck, and it currently services 20 accounts right now, and it's doing about $15K in weekly revenue. And so for those of you who are hearing about bread for the first time, the main stats to be thinking about is, does it come with vehicles? What's the weekly revenue look like? And how many different accounts are they servicing? Those are the things to start to listen to as you're kind of getting into this space as well. We have a FedEx route out of Iowa. That's 22 P&D routes at 1.5 million. It has a manager, 3 spare trucks, and there's a good chance it's SBA eligible as well for those of you who are looking for those. And it's also a 6-day operation, so no Sundays. Next one is we have a bread route out of Florida at 280,000. This is doing about 6K of weekly revenue. There's a truck included, and it has 7 weekly accounts. And then the next one we have is a line haul business out of Maine. It's priced at 4.995 million, and it is 9 dedicated solos and 10 unassigned solos. They also have 4 spare tractors. All the dedicated runs are premium, good roster of drivers, and 4 lead drivers on staff as well to help with any of those challenges that may come up from a management perspective. So those are the new listings this week. If you have questions about any of those, FedEx, P&D, line haul, bread, any of those, we have them all posted on our website. You can reach out to our team. We can give you all the details on them. From an events perspective, we're starting to wind down at the end of the year as the rest of the year is pretty crazy in terms of peak season. So travel gets harder and there's all the holidays, but we do still have a couple to talk about. We have another investor summit next week in our office in Nashville. If you've never heard about those or don't know what they are, those are basically a time for you to, get a crash course in everything FedEx has to offer. We're trying to teach you as much as we possibly can in a short period of time. So it's 2 days. And the goal of it really is that coming out of it, we want you to know if FedEx is the right industry for you or not. And I want you to be able to enter the FedEx space confidently. And so that's what this summit is designed to do. So if you're interested in that, you can just go to our website to the events page and click on any of them. You can sign up directly on there. And again, it is in person in Nashville. So hopefully you will get to come down and I'll get to see you in person next week. And again, it's on November 6th and 7th next week. Other event that we're always going to mention is we do have the expo next year in, I think it's the first week of August, actually. And it's in Dallas. And that's our big contractor and expo for everyone across the industry, not just FedEx. It's Amazon, bread, logistics as a whole. Everyone's invited, even if you're a new investor still looking to get into the space. So it's completely free to attend. The only reason you should go ahead and get on it now is that those hotel blocks will sell out, and it's at a really nice hotel at a Gaylord property down in Dallas. So if you're interested in that, that is, again, free to register for, and it's on our website as well. Okay, so we're going to hop over to Q&A now. So we got a couple questions coming in, and we'll start first with a Qual Cert question, Jesse. And I don't know if you've seen anything on it. Do we know if FedEx is going to compensate at all for the recertification?
Yeah, there's not been any announcements yet for any incentives around recert, unfortunately. So a lot of times they will, but sometimes we've seen where if it's something that does have to be recertified or reattained later, they'll pay for the initial attainment, but they don't always pay for the secondary. So I would not expect it, but I would not be also surprised if they did provide at least some incentive towards it. We just haven't seen anything on it just yet.
Yeah. And, we can always hope that they'll provide incentive, but it's better to just plan that we won't. Plan and assume that you're not getting any incentive, and then it can be a pleasant surprise if they do. But They just haven't announced anything yet, so we'll see, and we'll let you know if that does change. Next one here is from Ed. So can multiple drivers take the 3-day course at the same time?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I'll plug Bright Flag Recruiting here for a second. They have a program where you can put drivers through virtually, and they can have up to 12 students in one. Now, the caveat there is we can't have more than 4 students per contractor. But what we can do is we can mix and match students from different contractors into the same group. So per contractor, there can only be 4 maximum at a time. FedEx has capped it at 4 per contractor in the same class.
Okay. And it's a follow-up question from Ed too. Are there still bottlenecks of getting drivers into that 3-day course? Do you still see some of that bottleneck at all now?
The only bottleneck is really that the road test part is so intensive. The classroom part is really not that hard to do, since again, Bright Flag, and there might be others out there, and I don't know of any, but Bright Flag is, providing the virtual classroom part. So that part can be done pretty easily. It's just that the road tests and the, driving through the cones out in the parking lot, that's really where the holdup is, because that is so time intensive for the trainer. And that has to be a certified trainer out there doing that. It can't be somebody else that they've assigned as a proxy. They have to physically be observing the driver for several hours in that process. So that's really where the bottleneck is. It's not the classroom part so much, it's the road test part.
Yeah. And I think that's unfortunately just something that, the way it works, you have to have a driver, you have to have somebody monitoring the driver. So it kind of has to be a one-on-one thing for, there can be other people around waiting to take their turn, but there's only so many people that you can get through in that type of setting. Okay, this one from Neil. So can you, in any sense, quantify the discounts for diesel from FedEx at the various places you can fill up, whether it's the terminal or Love's? He's seen anything from 40 cents to $1 off. So you may not have numbers, but anything you have, Jesse, on that?
No, you can probably answer this one better than I can, Josh. All I know is about the Opus wholesale price, and that's going to vary market to market. So that's about all I know.
Yeah, and that's the same. So there are wholesale rates you can get at the terminal pumps. That should typically be the place you target to fill up. There's rates, there are actual pumps at a lot of the terminals, typically the hubs, that you can fill your tractors up to get the best rates. And then the discounts on diesel outside of the hub are going to come from using certain fuel cards and accessing those discounts. So the ranges you're hearing are correct, but it's really going to vary. And, it's just a function of how, what wholesale rates look like against current rates in the market. And it just like a lot of fuel strategy too is trying to decide the right location to fill up in line haul. If you're moving across the country, you may want to not fill up in California and wait until you're in a cheaper state. There's things like that you may be doing as well to try to guide your fuel strategy. And so lots of things to think about there, but it is going to vary market to market. All right, this one here from so what does it take to upgrade a driver? So for instance, if you've got somebody who's in a P1000 right now and they want to move up to a 26-foot straight truck, what are the steps there to get them upgraded to that?
Yeah, great question. So there's nothing on the First Advantage side. So to kind of back off a little bit, the only time that there would be administrative changes that need to happen is if you're moving a driver from what's called an L10 vehicle up to a over L10 vehicle or an L20 vehicle. So basically, if the vehicle weighs less than 10,000 pounds gross vehicle weight rating, and then you move them up to a larger size truck, they will have to be reprocessed in First Advantage under the new classification as an L20 driver. If it's an L20 driver going from a vehicle that's already over 10K to a bigger vehicle over 10K, you're correct that all there is required there is just a new road test. They don't have to redo Qual Cert. And even for the L10 to L20, you don't have to redo Qual Cert, but you do have to have a new road test and you have to have the administrative processing on the back end. But for a P1000 to a straight truck, literally just a new road test, and that's it.
Perfect. And again, if you're coming from the old model, it used to be a lot more difficult than the new one, and that's definitely a pro compared to the old way you used to have to upgrade and go through that process. I know you talked about it, Jesse, but just quickly, can you kind of share approximate pricing for the initial training class and then what this new recertification pricing has been announced to be?
Sure. Yeah. The initial certification, what I'm talking about is the 5-day train the trainer, where you send a BC or a lead driver directly to a safety vendor to get certified. The price for that is $2,750 or somewhere in that neighborhood. The recert costs about $1,000 less than that. So we're seeing anywhere between $1,750 and $1,775 for the 2-day recert in-person course for your CT.
Yeah, and I saw a question about it. That's kind of the new announcement. If you missed it earlier, is that that is the price to recertify your trainers. Now, this is also a question I saw. Do the drivers need to be recertified, and is there a timeline on that?
So, like with everything with FedEx, there's not been any announcements, but don't think that means there won't ever be. We have not seen anything on that yet. I don't expect that there will be anything anywhere near like what's required for a CT. Part of the thing with the drivers is that they go through that ongoing safety training on a weekly basis. And so those videos are updated by the safety vendor as the space changes. So when there's changes to the DOT laws or the FMCSA or the NHTSA comes out with new seatbelt data, stuff like that, that's going to be automatically put into that ongoing safety training and those videos and those materials that the drivers have to consume on an ongoing basis. So I'd be a little surprised if there was a formal classroom process that the drivers have to pass again. I think what they're going to go for is just like was mentioned earlier, when the driver goes from one size vehicle to a bigger size vehicle, they've got all the head knowledge. It's just the practical skills behind the wheel. That's really where they're going to want to see other types of certification, like, again, that road test, whatever, to make sure they're safe behind whatever vehicle they get.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. And I don't know if you've seen anything. I haven't seen anything officially posted, but have you seen any data showing whether or not this new program was successful yet, or if it's improving safety or reducing accidents? I know we're a little bit early and that might not have come out yet, but I don't know if you've seen anything posted yet.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have not seen anything on that. What I would encourage all contractors to do is go back and look at what your safety track record is in your business from when you started Qual Cert compared to what it was before. Now, obviously, every new buyer coming into the space will be starting with Qual Cert, so you're not going to be able to quantify that. But I would be interested to see that from any providers that may have already gotten that data, because that's a really good data point that, again, like you said, Josh, no one from FedEx has released that, at least not that I've seen. They've not made it public, but that is a good data point to consider.
Yeah, I mean, it almost certainly has to be better. I haven't seen the data, but just the fact that there is a standard now, it would be shocking to me if there hasn't been a positive effect, because the kinds of things that qualified as, I safely trained and onboarded my new driver were just nowhere near the standard that we see now. So there were a lot of kind of shortcuts that people had to make just to get their drivers in the system as soon as possible because they needed them, and just accepting experience that counted, like Jesse said, but doesn't necessarily mean that they were safe or efficient drivers. Whereas now there's a new standard that all drivers have to go through. I would be shocked if there hasn't been a positive, series of changes that have happened, but there just hasn't been enough comprehensive data yet to come out with it. I wouldn't be surprised if FedEx announces that in the near future, though.
Yeah, let me give a quick shout out on this one too, Josh, because I think if we drill down into the purpose of the Qual Cert program, FedEx, for all the times that we sometimes see them just roll out some administrative things to kind of cover their butt with shippers and things like that, which totally makes sense from a liability perspective. This one is actually something that you have a tremendous amount of control into how it is mediated to your drivers. If your certified trainer wants to half-ass it, then that's the effect you're going to see on your drivers. But if you really take advantage of this program and you say, look, I've got my basic stepping stone materials here in this curriculum that I administer to my drivers. If I embellish this with things like personal stories and things that have personally helped me, when I'm a certified trainer myself, when I teach students, I'm going back and I'm dipping into my almost 2 decades as a driver, and I'm looking for things that have really helped me and making it personal for the drivers. And so if you just look at Qual Cert as this is something that I have to check off a box in order to get my driver behind the wheel, then that's the result you're going to get. But if you really put something into it and you make an effort to make this the start of the safety culture that you build in your ISP company, then I really think you are going to see different results if you treat it that way.
Yeah, I completely agree. And this helps force some of that, but at the same time, the best performing contractors are really going to embrace those ideas and bring it into their culture as well. So, Jesse, this is a kind of a tangential question, but what would you say is currently the best way to recruit and bring new drivers in for peak season?
Oh man, that is a huge question. Oh man, where do I start? The best way to recruit new drivers. So first of all, you're going to need a good idea of how many new butts and seats you're going to need to have. So getting a good handle on the forecasting for peak. And FedEx actually just about a week ago or so, they released their latest data, what they expect to see from shippers and the volume moving through the network. So having a good idea of what your head count needs to be, that marginal head count above your non-peak levels, you need to have a good idea there. And that'll kind of set the baseline for how many extra trucks you need and how many extra people you need. The next thing is that you're really going to want to maximize the amount of part-time help you find during peak season, because the fact of the matter is there's only a few days of the peak season that you're actually going to hit what we would call peak volume. So if you say, I need on my biggest peak day for these 3 or 4 days out of the entire peak season, that we're really going to see big numbers, you don't want to hire to that number and then expect that that number of drivers is going to be on the clock for you every single day. So what I would do is find out from your terminal what days are typically the heaviest volume days. In most buildings in the network, it's going to be Tuesday through Thursday. Most of the volume has moved through the network, and if it has to sit at a hub or a terminal over the weekend, maybe it gets processed on a Monday, but most of it's going to be moving through Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. Those are typically going to be your biggest volume days. Again, that's not every single place, but in general, figure out what the top day or two is going to be, and then see if you can maybe find some part-time help just to come on and be able to work those particular days of peak season. That way you're not promising someone a full-time position that you can't make good on, because you're not going to need them all 6 or 7 days of peak season. And then I guess the final thing is, again, we're talking about Qual Cert today. Make sure you don't compromise on the safety part of it when you bring new drivers in, even if you don't plan to keep them beyond peak season, because an accident that happens during peak season counts just as much as an accident that happens January through November. And so just remember that. Don't compromise your onboarding and your safety process bringing people on. I think if you do those 3 things, you'll be in good shape.
Perfect. Yeah, and like Jesse said, this is there's plenty more we could say on that, but I think those are some high level thoughts to help you guide that. And if you have more questions, just reach out to us. So last question here. So if anybody else has any more, you can go ahead and send them in the chat. But so Ed asked, considering all the processes, HR, safety, all the onboarding things you have to do, how long right now would you say it typically takes to take a driver from beginning until they can start delivering?
Yeah, so when we say start delivering, we mean just getting them behind the wheel, I would assume, by themselves. And so that can be as little as a week. Typically, it's more like 2 weeks. And then there's usually at least another 2 weeks on top of that to get them fully up to par in terms of the productivity levels you want them to hit. So you might just start out a new driver with 40 to 50% of what a full route would be, and then kind of stair step them up until they're running a full route, what we consider, fully optimized route. The entire process for that can be as much as a month. It can be as little as 2 weeks, but the administrative side to actually get them processed, get the background check done, if they're staying on top of it from their end, it can be as little as a week, but generally it's more like 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb. And it's better to be conservative and try to get them in sooner than to wait until, saying that in the past you might have brought somebody in 4 days, and so that's what you think you can do it for the next time, where there's any number of wrinkles, especially right now during peak when you're trying to ramp them up and get them ready. It's better to have more time than less. Perfect. All right. Well, that's the last question I have here. So thanks everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Jesse, for being here and being here to provide all this content and these updates for everyone. We mentioned lots of updates, lots of events and things that are coming up. So if you have any questions about those or the listings that we talked about, feel free to reach out to our team. Other than that, we hope everyone has a great rest of the week, and we'll see you next time on the next webinar. Thanks, everybody.